My name is Edmund Harte. I'm 61 years old. I spent 28 years as a high school shop teacher in Sudbury, Ontario. I can build a bookshelf in an afternoon. I make a chili that my neighbors have tried to get the recipe for since 1998, and I have never, not once in my life, considered myself a man who misses things. I notice things. It's how I'm wired. I catch the loose nail before the deckboard splits. I see the crack in the foundation before it becomes a flood. My students used to say I had eyes in the back of my head. My wife Colette used to say I noticed everything except what was right in front of me. Turns out she was right about that. Welcome to Dad's Hidden Revenge. Get comfortable. And remember, the people in these stories who thought they were untouchable, they were always wrong. Subscribe so you don't miss a single one. It started on a Wednesday in late March, the kind of day that can't decide if it's still winter. The snow was pulling back from the edges of the yard, but not committing to leaving. The way it does in northern Ontario every year, like it owes you an apology it's not quite ready to give. I was in the middle of cleaning out our storage room, the one off the back of the garage that we'd been using as a catch-all since 2009. Colette had been after me to deal with it since Christmas. Said if one more box of your stuff fell on her when she was looking for the camping gear, she was going to have a garage sale and I wouldn't be consulted on pricing. My daughter Isabel was over with her husband Pete, helping me shift things around. She's 34, works in HR at a mining services company, sharp and methodical, in the way that people who grew up watching their father measure twice and cut once sometimes become. Pete's a decent enough man, quiet, the kind of guy who shows up when you need help moving furniture and doesn't make a production of it. I've always liked him for that. I was pulling boxes from the back shelf when Isabella found the accordion folder. It was wedged between a box of my old teaching manuals and a broken badminton set we hadn't used since 2004. Manila colored, the kind with the elastic cord closure, gone brittle with age. It had no label on the front. Just a small piece of masking tape on the side, with two initials written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I didn't think anything of it. I handed it to Isabel to set aside and went back to the shelf. Then she went quiet. Not the quiet of someone tired or distracted. A different kind of quiet. The wrong kind. I've been a teacher long enough to know the difference between a student looking at a textbook and a student looking at something they shouldn't have found. Your shoulders know before your brain catches up. She was standing with the folder open in her hands. Her face had gone the color of old snow. That particular shade of pale that doesn't mean sick, it means shaken. Dad. Her voice was careful, the way you'd carry a glass of water that was very full. What is it? She looked up at me, then at Pete, then back at me. I think you should look at this. Pete stepped back without being asked. Good man. I took the folder. Here is what was in it. A series of documents, 9 in total, folded and arranged in chronological order by someone who wanted to be able to find things again quickly. 3 were from a law office in Toronto I'd never heard of. 2 were bank statements, personal account, showing transfers going back to 2007. 1 was a signed agreement, 2 pages, notarized. The others were correspondence, emails printed and dated, some with letterheads, some without. The name on the bank statements was not mine. It was my brother-in-law's, Colette's brother, a man named Victor Marsh, 64 years old, retired property developer from Oakville, who had been the best man at my wedding in 1989, who took my father's old fishing rod when Dad died in 2015 because he said he'd always admired it, and who sent us a Christmas card every year with the same printed message and a signature that somehow still managed to feel impersonal. And the name on the notarized agreement was Colette's, my wife of 36 years. I stood in my cold garage in my work gloves, and I read that document 4 times, the way you reread a sentence when your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing. And on the 4th read, I understood it. In 2006, my mother had passed away. She left an estate, not a large one by any standard. The house in Elliott Lake, some savings, a modest portfolio that her financial planner had managed for her over 20 years of careful, quiet accumulation. The total, once the estate was settled, came to $347,000. I was the sole beneficiary. It was the one substantial, financial thing I had ever inherited. And I had done what I always did with money that felt unearned. I put it somewhere safe, opened a separate investment account, and didn't touch it, telling myself it was for retirement. What the agreement told me was this. In 2007, 1 year after the account was opened, Colette had signed over power of attorney over that specific account to Victor. Not to me. To Victor. The notarized agreement gave him the authority to manage, transfer, and liquidate the funds on her authorization, with a clause that described the arrangement as part of a family investment partnership that I had never heard of, never been told about, and certainly never signed anything relating to. The bank statements showed what had happened after that. Between 2007 and 2014, the account had been drained, not all at once. Slowly, in increments of $12,000 to $20,000, transferred out over 7 years in a pattern that looked, from the outside, like normal investment activity, until the account reached a balance of zero, $347,000. Gone. I took my work gloves off. I set them on the shelf. I looked at Isabel. "Did you know about this?" I asked her. She shook her head. Her eyes were bright with something that wasn't quite tears, but was getting there. "I've never seen these before in my life," she said. And then, because she is her father's daughter, she said the thing I needed to hear and didn't know I needed. "Dad, don't call Mom yet. Don't call anyone yet. Let's just sit with this for a minute." We sat with it for longer than a minute. Pete made coffee. He didn't ask questions. Some men understand instinctively when the right thing to do is put the kettle on and step back, and Pete, whatever his other qualities, is that kind of man. I sat at my garage workbench with 9 documents in front of me and tried to do what I always do when something is broken. Look at it clearly, understand the structure of the damage, and figure out what's still load-bearing before I decide what to do next. My mother had worked in a textile plant for 31 years. She packed her lunch every day until she retired. She drove the same car for 14 years. That money wasn't an inheritance. It was her life, converted into numbers, and she left it to me because I was her son and she trusted me with it, and I had put it in an account and told myself it was safe. I breathed. Then I asked Isabel to take the folder home with her. "Keep it somewhere he doesn't know about," I said. Meaning Pete, meaning no offense to Pete, meaning I simply didn't know yet who needed to know what and in what order. She understood immediately. "And don't say anything to your mother," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Are you okay?" "No," I said. "But I will be." She left with the folder tucked inside her coat like she was carrying something fragile, which she was. I finished cleaning the storage room by myself, swept the floor, reorganized the shelves, stacked the boxes in the right order. I don't know why. It felt necessary. Like putting one thing in order when everything else had come apart. Colette got home at 5:30. She'd been at her book club, which she's attended on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month since 2011, and which has, I know for a fact, read fewer books than any book club in the history of organized leisure. She came in from the cold and said the storage room looked much better and asked what I wanted for dinner. I said whatever she felt like making. She made pasta. We ate at the kitchen table. We talked about the weather, about the neighbor's fence, about whether we should go to Isabel's for Easter or have them come here. I answered every question in a normal voice with a normal face. And I want you to understand that this was the hardest thing I did in a very long time, harder than anything that came after, because I am not a man who has ever been comfortable with pretending. I slept badly that night. The next morning, I called my old college friend, a man named Gordon Fitch, a retired accountant who spent 30 years at a mid-sized firm in Ottawa before his knees gave out and he moved to a place near Kingston to grow tomatoes and fix up a boat he never takes out. Gordon is the most methodical human being I have ever known. He was the best man at the first wedding I was best man at, which is the kind of detail that means we've been in each other's lives long enough that I don't have to explain anything from the beginning. "I need you to look at something," I told him. "Financial documents. Possibly an estate matter." A pause. "Possibly, I'll explain when I see you." He drove up on Saturday. I showed him everything. He read through it at my kitchen table, with his reading glasses pushed up on his head, the way he always does when he's concentrating, and he didn't say anything for a long time, which is Gordon's version of alarm. When Gordon goes quiet, things are serious. "Edmund," he said finally. I know if this is what it looks like, this is not a small matter. I know. You need to talk to an estate lawyer, not a general practitioner, who specifically handles estate litigation. He looked at me over his glasses. And you need to talk to Colette. I know that too, I said. I'm just not ready yet. Why not? I thought about it. Because I want to understand the whole picture before I have the conversation. Once that conversation starts, I can't unstart it. He nodded slowly. He didn't push. That's what 35 years of friendship looks like. He also, before he left, gave me the name of a woman named Iris Park, an estate and civil litigation lawyer in Sudbury, whom he'd dealt with twice on behalf of clients, and described as the sharpest person in any room she walks into, including rooms with other lawyers. I called Iris on Monday. She saw me on Thursday. She read through the documents with the kind of careful efficiency that makes you understand immediately why some people charge what lawyers charge. She asked 4 questions. She took notes on a legal pad, and then she put her pen down and said this. Mr. Harte, the power of attorney your wife signed was not limited. She granted Victor Marsh full authority over the account, depending on how the original account was structured and whether your name was on it. My mother's estate was processed in my name, I said. The account was opened in my name. She made a note. Then your wife would not have had the legal authority to grant that power of attorney without your consent. If you did not authorize this arrangement, and your signature does not appear on that notarized agreement, it doesn't. Then what you're looking at is, at minimum, misappropriation of funds from a jointly marital asset, possibly more, depending on what the transfers were used for, and whether Victor Marsh can be demonstrated to have knowingly received funds he had no right to. She paused. Did you have any knowledge of this account being managed externally? None. She looked at me steadily. Then I think you should give me permission to begin pulling some records. I told her to do whatever she needed to do. What Iris found over the next 3 weeks was this. The $347,000 hadn't simply been transferred to Victor. It had gone into a holding account connected to a numbered company registered in Ontario, a company that, at the time of registration in 2007, had listed 2 directors. Victor Marsh was one. The other was a name I didn't recognize until Iris explained it to me, and then I recognized it very well. Colette's cousin, a man named Dean Fournier, 58, a real estate developer in the Niagara region who had been quietly expanding his portfolio of rental properties since the early 2000s, a man who came to our 25th anniversary dinner and gave a toast about family loyalty that I now found, thinking back on it, spectacularly ironic. The money had been used as a down payment on 2 investment properties in Hamilton. Those properties had since tripled in value. The numbered company, under which they were registered, had been generating rental income for 17 years. Victor and Dean had been using my mother's life savings to build their investment portfolio. With my wife's help, I drove to the lake after Iris called me with the final summary. I sat in my truck for an hour and 20 minutes, looking at the ice that was just beginning to break up along the edges of Ramsey Lake. And I thought about my mother packing her lunch in a tartan bag every morning for 31 years. And I did not feel something that I would call grief or rage. I felt something colder than either of those. A kind of clarity that comes after the shock has passed, and what's left is just the shape of the thing. Clean and clear. I drove home. I made chili. It's better the next day, but I didn't have the patience. I told Colette on a Sunday. I asked her to sit at the kitchen table. I put the documents in front of her. Not all of them, just the notarized agreement with her signature and one of the bank statements. She recognized them immediately. That was the first answer I needed. She didn't cry. She went very still in the way I had almost never seen her go still. Not in 36 years, not through job losses or family illness or the deaths of both her parents. And in that stillness I saw something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not fear, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just watched it be set down by someone else. How long have you known? She asked. 3 weeks, I said. A pause. How did you find it, Isabel? Something moved through her expression, something between pain and resignation. Edmund, I need you to understand that I didn't know how it would, Tell me exactly how it started, I said. From the beginning. No context first, no explanation first. Just start. So she told me. In 2006, the year my mother died, Victor had come to her with what he'd called an opportunity. The estate money was sitting in an account doing nothing, he said. He had a contact, Dean, who was positioning properties in Hamilton before the market shifted. If the money could be used for an initial down payment, the return within 5 years would be significant. It would come back to us doubled, said. Maybe more. And nobody needed to know the mechanics of it, because the result would be the same. Money in our account, more than we'd started with. She'd believed him, and she'd been afraid to tell me because she knew I wouldn't agree. Knew I'd say it wasn't our money to risk, that it was my mother's estate, that we had no business treating it like seed capital for Victor's schemes. She was right. I wouldn't have agreed. And when it didn't come back? I asked. A long pause. Victor said the market had shifted, that the properties were still worth something, but the cash wasn't liquid, that we'd have to wait. And then you kept waiting. She nodded. For 17 years. She didn't answer. I stood up. I walked to the window. Outside, a chickadee was working at the feeder. Colette had put up in November, hitting the same seed in the same mechanical way, indifferent to everything happening on the other side of the glass. You let me think that account was sitting there, I said. For retirement. For our retirement. I know. My mother's money. I know, Edmund. I turned around. I'm going to need you to be completely honest with me about everything else from this point forward, I said. Not because I've decided what I'm doing yet, but because if I find out later that you've given me a partial story, I won't be able to work with whatever partial story comes after it. She nodded. She understood that. It was at that moment the most honest acknowledgement she'd given me in 3 weeks of not knowing I was watching. What I hadn't anticipated was Victor finding out that the documents had resurfaced. He called me directly. 8 days after I talked to Colette. I didn't know how he'd found out. I found out later that Colette had told him, not to warn him, she said, but because she'd panicked and hadn't known what else to do. I don't entirely believe that, but I've set it aside because it no longer matters. The call was brief. I heard there might be some confusion about that investment account from a few years back, he said. Smooth as polished granite. That's one way to describe it, I said. I want you to know that there was never any intent to. The structure of it was complicated, Edmund, and I think if we sat down together, Victor. I kept my voice level. We're not sitting down together. What we're doing is this. I've already spoken to a lawyer. She's already pulled the registration records on the numbered company. And when I hang up this phone, I'm going to let her continue the work she's been doing without interruption. So, I need you to hear me clearly. Don't call Colette again about this. Don't contact Dean about this. And don't call me again unless you hear from Iris Park's office first. Silence. Edmund, if this becomes a legal matter, there are implications for Colette as well. Her signature is... I know what her signature is on, I said. So does my lawyer. Goodbye, Victor. I hung up and called Iris. Move up the timeline, I said. Whatever you need from me to accelerate the civil claim, I'll have it to you by end of week. She asked if something had changed. Someone reminded me that waiting has a cost, I said. She filed the civil claim 3 weeks later. Victor and Dean were named as respondents. The claim outlined the unauthorized use of estate funds, the structure of the numbered company, and the rental income that had been generated using capital that had never been theirs to use. It asked for the return of the original principal, accrued interest calculated from the date of the first transfer, and a portion of the rental income proportional to the contribution of the misappropriated funds to the property purchases. Total claimed $891,000. I want to tell you something about what I did in the weeks between filing and the first response from the other side's lawyers. I kept teaching. I'm retired from the high school, but I've been running a woodworking program on weekends out of the community center since 2019. Retired guys, a few younger men, one woman named Patricia. Actually, no, someone else. A woman named Suzanne who makes furniture as a side business and has twice corrected my joinery technique, which I've respected and not forgotten. I kept going. I kept showing up on Saturday mornings with my coffee and my apron. I kept explaining the difference between a butt joint and a dovetail joint to men who were using power tools for the first time at 60. It grounded me. That's the only word for it. When everything else was moving and uncertain, the work was still the work. Victor's lawyers responded in 6 weeks with a counterposition that was impressive mainly for its audacity. They argued that Colette's authority over the account was legitimate under the joint marital asset provisions, and that the investment had been made in good faith with the intention of benefiting the marital estate. In other words, it was a family decision and Edmund just didn't know about it. Iris dismantled this in 2 steps. First, she demonstrated that the account had been opened exclusively in my name as the sole beneficiary of my mother's estate, and that no joint registration had ever been applied for or granted. It was not a marital asset. It was my inheritance. Second, she obtained, through a request to the numbered company's filing records, the distribution history of the rental income from the Hamilton properties. Victor and Dean had been splitting the income 50-50 since 2009, not 49, not 51. Exactly half each. No provision, not a single transfer, had ever been directed toward Colette, toward me, or toward any account either of us controlled. Whatever the arrangement had been sold to Colette as, the execution had always been a 2-man operation. The mediation was set for October. I don't use the word justice lightly, because I've been in the world long enough to know that what courts deliver is usually something closer to settlement than justice. But what happened in that mediation room in Sudbury on a gray Tuesday morning was, by any reasonable measure, the most complete accounting I could have hoped for. Victor and Dean, faced with the full documentation and the rental income distribution records, did not want this to go to trial. Their lawyers made an opening offer, which Iris rejected without ceremony. Their second offer was better. Iris rejected that too, and explained, very calmly, what the exhibit list for a full trial would look like, and which portions of it would be most likely to interest the regional business press. Victor settled. The final settlement amount was $778,000. Not the full claim, but within range, and structured as a lump sum payment within 60 days. Iris had also negotiated, as a condition of settlement, that the numbered company be dissolved, and that both Victor and Dean sign a statement acknowledging that the funds had been used without the account holder's knowledge or consent. I did not attend the mediation in person. Iris represented me. I was at the community center teaching a 68-year-old retired electrician named Hugh how to cut a proper mortise and tenon joint without taking his fingers off. When Iris called me afterward, I was in my truck in the parking lot with sawdust on my jacket. "It's done," she said. "Tell me the number," she told me. I sat with it for a moment. "Is that acceptable to you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "That's acceptable." I drove home. I made chili. I made enough for 4 people even though it was just me that night, because some habits are older than the circumstances they developed in. I need to tell you about Isabel. She had known, from that Saturday in the garage, that something serious was happening. She'd kept the folder, kept quiet, and waited. She never asked me for updates I wasn't ready to give. She texted every week or so with normal things. A photo of her dog. A complaint about the highway traffic into the city. A question about whether I still had Dad's old camping stove. Normal things that were also, I understood, a way of saying I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. When I called her after Iris's call, she was in a meeting. She stepped out. "It's done," I said, a pause. "Dad, are you okay?" "Getting there," I said. "I wanted you to know first." She was quiet for a moment. "What about Mom?" "That's a longer conversation," I said, "and it's between me and her." "Okay," she said. "Do you want to come for dinner this week?" I said yes. I went on Thursday. Pete made ribs on the kitchen grill, which he does extremely well for a man who claims he can't cook. We didn't talk about any of it. We talked about their plans to refinish the back deck and about whether the Leafs were going to do anything useful this year, which they probably aren't, which is the permanent condition of being a Leafs fan, and one of the most reliable constants of my adult life. After dinner, I sat on their back step with a coffee, and Isabel came and sat beside me. And we watched the yard go dark and didn't say anything for a while, and that was the right thing. I want to be honest about where things stand, because I don't believe in endings that wrap too cleanly. Colette and I are still in the same house. Still married, technically, in the way that 36 years of anything is not technically dismantled by a single season, however bad the season. We are seeing a counselor, which is not something I would have predicted myself doing at 61, and which has turned out to be less about talking about feelings and more about learning to say what I mean directly and without a 10-year delay, something I apparently needed to work on before all of this, which is useful to know. Whether we come through this as a married couple, in the conventional sense, I genuinely don't know. Some days I look at her across the dinner table and I see the woman I married. Some days I see a woman who let her brother use my mother's savings to build his own future and said nothing for 17 years. Both of those things are true simultaneously, which is something no one tells you about long marriages. That the person and the thing they did can exist at the same time without resolving into a single image. Victor and I have not spoken since the phone call. We will probably not speak again. His Christmas card did not arrive last December, which I didn't notice until Colette mentioned it, and I realized I didn't have a feeling about it at all. Not satisfaction, not sadness. Nothing. The absence of a person who was never quite who you thought they were doesn't leave the same kind of hole. Dean Fournier I never knew well enough to miss. The $778,000 sits in a new account, only my name. I've spoken to a fee-only financial planner in Sudbury. Not a firm that manages money on commission, someone who charges by the hour and has no stake in what I decide to do. And we've been working through what the right structure is, not rushing it. The money waited 17 years in someone else's hands. It can wait a little longer in mine until I've done it right. Iris sent me a card when the settlement cleared. Handwritten, which I didn't expect. She wrote that she was glad the outcome had been a fair one and that it had been a privilege to work the case. I've kept it on my workbench. I don't know exactly why, but it seemed like the right place for it. Ryan? No, that name's taken, I know. Isabel's son, my grandson Theo, who is 14 and mostly interested in hockey and his phone in equal measure, came with his parents for Easter. We built a small step stool together in the garage, while Isabel and Pete and Colette managed the kitchen. He has good hands. Patient, which surprised me, because at 14 I had the patience of a weather system. I showed him how to mark a line with a marking gauge instead of a pencil, and he did it 3 times until he got it right without being asked to try again. At one point, he looked up from the wood and said, "Grandpa, are you and Grandma okay?" I looked at him for a moment, 14 years old. Sharp. "We're working on it," I said. He nodded, like that was a satisfying answer, which maybe it is, when you're 14 and you understand instinctively that working on something is the honest alternative to pretending it's fine. We finished the step stool. It's solid. No wobble. The joints are clean. I've been thinking lately about what my mother would make of all of this. She was a practical woman, not cold, but not sentimental in ways that got in the way of clear thinking. When my father walked out when I was 9, she didn't spend time on bitterness. She went back to the plant on a Monday, packed her lunch in her tartan bag, and got on with the business of raising a son on her own. She never said a word against my father to me, which I only understood the full cost of when I was old enough to understand what it costs to stay quiet about the things that hurt you. I think she'd be angry about the money. I think she'd be angrier about the years I didn't know. And I hope, she'd recognize that I did what she would have done. Looked at the full picture, made sure I understood the structure of the damage, and then fixed what could be fixed. Her tartan lunch bag is still on a hook in my garage. Has been since I cleared out her house in 2016. I keep meaning to move it somewhere better, and I keep not moving it. Some things you hold on to not because they're useful but because they're the realest object left of a person you've been trying not to forget. I'm still the man who notices things, is what I want to tell you. I'm still the man who builds things to last and fixes them when they break. I missed something for 17 years that I should not have missed, and I've had to sit with what that means, and I'm still sitting with it. But I found it eventually, and when I found it, I knew what to do. That's not nothing. That's, in fact, most of what there is. If this story meant something to you, hit like and subscribe for more stories from Dad's Hidden Revenge. Drop a comment and tell us where in Canada, or anywhere in the world, you're watching from. We read every single one.